100 years ago this year, the cornerstone was laid on a hill above Helena that would become home to Carroll College. 31 years ago, history professor Bob Schwartout arrived on campus to teach. 4 years ago, he sat down to begin writing the history of the school's first 100 years.
I began to focus most of my free time, starting 4 years ago, and then the manuscript itself that became the book began about 18 months ago. One of the courses I teach at Carroll is Montana history, and Carroll's history sort of fits into that Montana story. So it's the coming of the railroads, it's the rise of industrial mining that then begins to bring people into the territory in really large numbers, so much so that Montana then becomes a state in 1889. The population continues to grow rather dramatically, and a large percentage of that population is Catholic. But with the arrival of those industrial workers, so many of whom were Catholic, that really helps to fuel the establishment of the Catholic Church in Montana, especially in western Montana. The Helena Diocese is created. The second bishop of the diocese is John Patrick Carroll, who comes from Dubuque, Iowa. When he comes to Montana, he not only is anxious to establish parishes, establish churches for these growing Catholic communities, but he concludes that the diocese really needs a college of its own. So in many ways, that decision to establish Carroll grows out of these rather dramatic demographic changes that are taking place in Montana in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I think I became interested in Carroll's history almost as soon as I arrived at the school 31 years ago, just because I found, well, I'm a historian, and so I find any sort of historical topic to be intriguing. In the Centennial volume, I tried to start, if not every chapter, then many of the chapters with a kind of dramatic story that could then set the stage for what follows after that. The second chapter, for example, begins with the 1931 football season, when Mount St. Charles College is not only untied and undefeated throughout the year, but in fact is unscored upon for the entire season, and also beats both the University of Montana and the Montana State Bobcats. Often viewed as maybe the greatest season of football in the history of the school, but it's 1931, so this is in the midst of the Great Depression, one of the worst years in the Great Depression. And I try to make the point that the success that this small college football team has at that time helps to lift the spirits not only of the school, but of the community as a whole during hard times. And in some ways is an example of the kind of perseverance that has marked the school through much of its history. Well, I didn't want this to just be what I would call celebratory history, where we would use it as an opportunity to pat ourselves in the back. I'm a trained historian. I'm a professional historian. And so I thought this should be, serious analytical history. I tried to do that, and that meant that I had to cast my net as widely as possible in doing the research.
The publication, Bold Minds in Blessed Hands, the first century of Montana's Catholic College, makes its public debut this week as the school's 99th class is set to graduate from the liberal arts college.